Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Innovations to Increase CACFP After-School Meals Participation. My name is Carolyn Waite and I'm a Program Manager here at Share Our Strength. So thanks again for joining us today. Just to give you a brief overview of what we'll be doing during our webinar, we're just going to start with housekeeping and introduction. Then we're going to have an overview of what the After-School Meals Program is. So I hope that's not too much of a review for you, but just want to make sure that we're all starting on the same page. Then we'll have an introduction to the umbrella model, the first innovation that we'll be sharing today, and we'll go over the pilot test for the umbrella model. And then we'll have a story of implementation from a school food service director. Then we'll introduce the supper in the classroom innovation and go through the pilot test for supper in the classroom. And then again, we'll have a story from a school food service director about implementing that. And we will have time at the end for Q&A. So just a few housekeeping notes. We are in listen-only mode, so you cannot speak or be heard on this webinar. That said, you can chat in questions at any point. So go to the questions section on the Go to Webinar menu at the right of your screen. So you can type your questions there. And again, we will address all of the questions at the end of the webinar. And if your question is directed towards one of the speakers in particular, just put that in your question and it'll make it a little bit easier to direct your question at the end. This webinar will be recorded and we will make the recording and the slides and any other resources discussed available afterward. And we couldn't do this webinar without saying a quick thank you to our After School Meals Innovation partner, Tyson Foods. And so again, my name is Carolyn Waite, a Program Manager in our Center for Best Practices. And the other main speaker today will be Jill Panicelli, a Senior Program Manager with our Program Innovation team. So again, like I said, I just want to do a quick overview of what the After School Meals Program is to make sure we're all on the same page. And the After School Meals Program is a subcomponent of the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which is a federal child nutrition program that provides reimbursement funding to offset the cost of providing healthy meals and snacks to children and adults in a variety of care settings. So for those of you who aren't very familiar with the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP, it can be a rather complicated program that has kind of 5 main program subcomponents. So it works in child development centers, family daycare homes, adult daycare centers, emergency shelters, and then at-risk after-school programs, which is what we're really talking about today. So when we talk about the After-School Meals Program at Share Our Strength, we really mean the at-risk after-school subcomponent of the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And so, as I said, it's a federal child nutrition program, so it is governed by Congress and administered at the federal level by the United States Department of Agriculture, and then it gets implemented in every state across the country by a different designated agency, and then that agency within each state administers the program, working with institutions that run the program in facilities, and it's at that facility level that they actually serve meals to kids. So I'm just going to zoom in on the top 2 levels of this. So like I said, Congress, they set the law for the program. They set the reimbursement rates as well. And then the U.S. Department of Agriculture does the regulations and oversight at the federal level. And the USDA administers all the child nutrition programs, so CACFP is one. They also administer the National School Lunch Program, which many of you may be even more familiar with than the CACFP. But I wanted to put this up here because, as you may know, the National School Lunch Program has its after-school snacks program. So you can do area-eligible after-school snacks through NSLP or after-school snacks based on children's eligibility status as well. And then through the Child and Adult Care Food Program, you can again do after-school snacks, and you can also do after-school meals, and both of those through the at-risk program, if you will. So I just put that up there to show, since many of you may be more familiar with NSLP and may do snacks through NSLP, but the Child and Adult Care Food Program is also up there as an option for schools that want to do meals. And so just to zoom back out again into this big overview from Congress to kids, before I zoom in now on that state agency, institution, and facility piece. So as I mentioned, in each state, there's a designated agency that runs the program. So in your state, it may be the Department of Education, it may be the Department of Agriculture, maybe the Department of Health. It really varies by state. And often the Child and Adult Care Food Program is in the same agency as the National School Lunch Program, but it is different sometimes. So if you have a question about that, you can definitely reach out to us after this webinar if you're not sure how to find your state agency for CACFP. So the state agency will oversee institutions, and that is basically any organization that works directly with the state agency to run the program. So you can have an independent center, which is just kind of a single site, so that could be, you know, a Boys and Girls Club or a freestanding after-school program that they serve meals to kids just in their one location, and they work directly with the state agency to do that. Or you could have a sponsoring organization that runs the program at multiple facilities or sites. So school food authorities that run the program in multiple schools. The school food authority would be considered your sponsoring organization, and then all of the individual schools where you run the program would be your sponsored center or facility. And so just a little bit more about the requirements to be an after-school meals program facility. You have to be located within the attendance boundary of a public school with at least 50% of the children eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Private and charter schools that run the program could use their own free and reduced price meal data, but otherwise everyone has to use public school data. But it could be the elementary school, the middle school, or the high school. The other important element for after-school meals programs is offering a structured and supervised environment. So this can't just be a free-for-all or, you know, leaving out meals in the hallway as kids are leaving without any kind of supervision. But really beyond that, it's pretty loose. And there has to be regular educational or enrichment programming. But for schools, this could be any number of things. Most schools have, you know, maybe a study hall or tutoring, homework assistance, in addition to all of the many clubs that may go on, from Spanish club to drama, etc. All of those things count as educational enrichment programming. And USDA has taken a very broad and flexible approach to defining that. And so as long as that programming is offered, you're good. And then you have to meet applicable licensing or health and safety standards. But again, for schools, USDA has made this very easy and said, if you're approved to participate in the National School Lunch Program for lunch, you have met that health and safety standard for after-school meals. And the after-school meals program is open to all children and teens who are 18 years or under at the beginning of the school year, which is really great because then you don't have to keep track of anyone's birthdays during the school year. And you could serve to all children who may be on your campus or even in the neighborhood, because there is no enrollment or eligibility documentation required. So the kids who participate don't even have to be students at a school. It could be a sibling, it could be another kid in the neighborhood who happens to go to another school who could come in. And all meals are served free of charge, up to 1 meal and 1 snack per child per day. So again, there's no enrollment or eligibility needed to establish that the child can receive a free meal. Everyone gets a free meal in this program, which is great because as the sponsor or provider, that means you are getting the highest reimbursement rate possible for all of the meals that you serve. And so if you want more information about these and other requirements of the CACFP At-Risk After-School Meals Program, I recommend the USDA handbook. It basically goes through all of the regulations for the program, but in a much more readable format than the regulations. And so it describes, you know, the educational enrichment programming and licensing, health and safety requirements and all of that. But I just want to highlight a few points that set the stage for innovation and show where there are areas for flexibility. So one of those areas is when the meals are served. The regulations and the handbook just state that it has to be after the final school bell, and it has to occur sometime during your regular hours of operation, but that is what you define to the state agency. So you can tell the CACFP state agency our after school hours are 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. and you can serve that after school meal anytime between 3 and 6 p.m. And there are no federal requirements regarding meal time, order, or spacing, other than, again, it has to be after the final school bell. So you could serve supper at 3:01 p.m. if your bell rings at 3 p.m. So even though people think of supper as the evening meal, again, it could be served in the middle of the afternoon if that's what works best for you. You could also serve a supper first and a snack later, or a snack first and then a supper later. There's also flexibility in where the meals are served. There is no requirement that the meals be served in the cafeteria, and groups may eat separately. So if you have a lot of activities going on in your building at the end of the day, those meals could occur wherever those groups of kids are. And then lastly, there is flexibility in who receives meals. So although USDA has said that competitive sports teams are not qualifying as an educational or enrichment program, athletes may eat as part of a broader program. So again, as long as you have enrichment activities that would be open to other children, like tutoring, homework help, drama, etc., then those athletes can come and eat. And there's also no requirement to participate in any of the enrichment activities that you're offering. So as long as those activities are available and students could choose to participate in them, you don't actually have to make sure that they do participate in them. And likewise, there's no requirement for enrollment, so it's not like you have to make sure that the kids enrolled at the beginning of the year in some kind of aftercare program. So that really sets the stage to be able to offer meals to all students who want one after school. So with that, we are going to turn it over to Jill Panicelli to talk about all of these exciting innovations.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. So Carolyn has really set the stage here well for us to talk about the innovations that we have tested in after-school meals. So the goal here was to uncover some models, some proven models that we could use in after-school meals to really increase the level of participation in the after-school meals program. So as of yet, there hasn't been a lot of testing done around after-school meals to figure out what are really the most effective ways of getting kids to participate. And so our No Kid Hungry innovation team ran pilot tests using these models that came out of our innovation processes, having high potential to really increase participation, but we needed to put that out in the field and actually make sure that that happened. So we're going to talk about those results and then what that means, what we learned from that in terms of best practices and what that means for you if you are interested in starting an after-school meals program or increasing participation in your current program. Next slide. So we're going to talk first about what we're calling the umbrella model, which you'll see a visual of on the next slide. So, and again, Carolyn set this up really well. So basically, the umbrella model is taking advantage of the areas for innovation and after-school meals. So the fact that there has to be some type of eligible enrichment activity, and so there has to be that activity there. However, the students don't have to actually participate in an after-school activity in order to take a meal. So, they are covered under this umbrella by the fact that there are all these different activities going on that, could be open to anybody. So therefore, all students at the school are able to come and take a meal, regardless of their participation in the activity. Next slide. So what we did was we tested this idea in 16 schools, this umbrella model. We did do this in both schools that were existing after-school meal schools as well as some that were new to CACFP. So we wanted to do it in both scenarios so that we could see, is this model effective in both situations or does it work better in one or the other? The requirements of participating in the pilot were basically just that they had this, at least one enrichment activity that is open to anybody, again, meeting the federal requirement that there is an activity going on that anybody could participate in. And then they had to, as part of the pilot, advertise the meal in 2 or more ways to the students. So basically they were responsible for spreading the word to the student body to say, this meal is here, you don't have to take part in an activity, come get the meal after school. So very minimal requirements, which is great. So it's a very actually pretty easy to implement program. Doesn't take a lot to do this. So what did we find? So really exciting, we found that the use of the umbrella model increased participation in the after-school meal by about 50%. And that was, we took a look at compared to historical data. So if the school was previously participating in after-school meals, then we compared it to their participation, the year before around the same time frame or the semester before, whenever we had that historical data available. So we compared it for that and saw about a 50% increase. And similarly for schools that did not have historical data because they were new to the program, we also looked at, versus what we were calling a closed model. So we had schools tell us the number of, or take count of the number of kids who were there just for the meal and not for a particular activity. And so we determined an increase based on, if those kids were not allowed to come under a closed model, what type of increase does this represent now that we opened it up to everybody? So in both situations, it was about a 50% increase, or in actual terms, about 30 kids. So this would vary depending on, of course, the size of your school. It varies, your initial baseline participation, pretty wide variation, but this was the average that we saw. So it's pretty exciting, especially because, we calculated that an additional 35 kids per day would result in about $115 extra reimbursement and commodities per day. So if you're looking at, even just a 4-day-a-week program, so Monday through Thursday, this would mean an additional $16,000 per year in those reimbursements and commodities. So this is a really good, we have heard from many food service operations that we've talked to that are running after school meals. This is really a great, can be a great boon to the bottom line, and can actually help support other food programs. So we think that this is a really important finding as well. Next slide. So how do we maximize the effectiveness of this umbrella model? So, we know that this works. We know that it can be really successful in terms of increasing participation by a significant amount. What are the best practices, and what did we learn from doing the tests in these 16 schools? So first, finding an administrative champion is really important. A lot of times the people who are interested in doing this might be food service representatives, cafeteria manager, or food service director from the district, which is great. However, it is really crucial that there is also support directly at the school level, and that's for a variety of reasons. An administrator can really help to address any staff concerns. So one of the things that found was that the biggest staff concerns were really this idea of supervision and feeling like, well, what if there's increased discipline problems by letting, just anybody stick around after school and have the meal. I do want to highlight that as part of this pilot, we asked all of our pilot partners, did they experience any increase in discipline problems above and beyond what they normally experience after school as a result of this pilot, and universally said no. So we find that that's really more of a perception issue than an actuality. However, it is important that that perception is dealt with, and so an administrative champion is really crucial for helping provide that support to staff to say, this is something that we're doing. We'll figure out how to handle any issues that come up. The administrators can also ensure coordination of effort amongst all of the appropriate staff members at the school. So as we'll see in just a minute, one of the really effective ways of spreading the word about this program is through the school staff. So making sure that all of the after-school staff that are there, the coaches, the band leaders, the leader of the Spanish club, whatever it is, that all of those after-school folks are encouraging their kids to go and take a meal before they come to the activity. So that's a really key piece, and an administrator can make sure that that is coordinated and can say to their staff, hey, you need to be promoting this, don't forget, tell all of your kids to go do this before they come to practice, or whatever it is. And then, lastly, administrators can help ensure that the message that these meals are available are delivered in a way that reaches the most kids. So we saw that, administrators were often the ones that were doing the PA announcements, or, telling kids in the hall afterwards, hey, don't forget to go grab the meal, or whatever that is. So they play a really important role, obviously because of their position. Next slide. So best practice number 2, so you want to use PA announcements and staff promotions to spread the word. So we did a survey of our schools that participated in the pilot. We had about 1,700 responses, and when students were asked how they heard about the meal, the majority, 61%, said it was through the announcements. 53% said through a friend, and 51% said through a teacher, coach, or other staff member. So in terms of what you can affect as the school, that would be making sure that that the word is out over the announcements, and again, that coordination with staff members to say, hey, coaches, don't forget, tell your kids to go get this meal before they come to practice. That's a really important piece, and then from there, the word spreads, kind of word of mouth through friends. So there are other ways that you can get the word out, and certainly folks did that. So there was about 20% of students said they heard through the school website. So there were other ways, so you could certainly do that through some social media attempts, but these were by far the most popular. Okay, and then best practice number 3, I do want to emphasize that I think these first two, having the administrative champion and spreading the word in effective formats, are by far the most crucial to ensure really good participation. However, we learned some really interesting things from the student survey that we think give us clues as to how we can make this even more effective. So I don't want to say that these are necessary by any means, but if you've already tried doing some of these things and you really want to boost your performance even more, these are some great ways of increasing participation even more highly. And so one of the things that we noticed is from the student survey, when we asked them, did you hear about the after-school meal? If so, did you try it? Why or why not? Of those who did not try the meal, the biggest reason that they said that they didn't is 44% said that they had other things to do after school, like a job or sports practice or watching siblings. And then 17%, not a ton, but said that they wouldn't have a way home if they stayed. So really the biggest thing was, I'm busy after school. I have places to go, things to do, but, that sort of thing. So what we heard from that and from the qualitative comments from the students is that there are some ways that we could really help kids who are busy and need to get places after school. So more than one serving line, if this is a possibility for your school, can be really helpful. We heard a lot about the lines and making it quick. So, hey, I need to eat and then go catch my bus, or I need to get to practice and, my coach is not going to wait, or, whatever that is. So finding ways that you can make this really efficient for folks. So more than one serving line, more than one point of service, if that is an option, is great too. Just anything to help get those kids through. One thing that we found really effective is direct delivery to large activities. So if there are, big groups of kids, for instance, the football team or, the band or any type of activity where it's a really large group of kids all going to the same place, you can, just have the meals, if you have the staffing and availability to do this, you can have the meals delivered to those activities, or the coaches or leaders of those activities can bring the meals down before practice, some way so that is kind of uniformly given to those activities, so that they don't, you're kind of clearing out the line to leave time for the folks who don't have to immediately get to those places, and then those kids who are part of those activities can get there quickly. They know that their meal is already there waiting for them. So that's a really good option if that's available for you. And then finally, transportation or bell schedule adjustments. We completely recognize may not be an option in all scenarios, but to help those kids who could really benefit from the meals but are not able to eat before they get on the bus, if you have any flexibility in terms of potentially having the buses come 5 minutes later, or as we'll talk about in a few minutes with supper in the classroom, if you are over your required instructional time and you could move the bell up, say by 5 minutes or so, but leave your transportation schedule the same, so that that, there is a little bit of leeway for kids to come get the meal before they have to go home. So just some alternatives to consider in order to really increase the ability of kids to get this meal. Next slide. Okay, and then best practice number 4, again, this is, I would say something to take things to the next level, certainly not a requirement of this model at all, but we would consider it a best practice, is to be really mindful of variety, choice, and quality with the type of food that you're offering. So one of the really exciting things that we found from the student survey is that of those who tried the meal, 30%, almost a third of the kids said that it was because the food looked good. So that's really exciting, and I think a really great testament to the awesome food that is being served after school, and the fact that kids are excited about it. However, on the flip side, of those who did not try the meal, also about a third, 36%, said that they would rather just eat the food that they have at home. And in the qualitative comments, we heard a lot about these themes of variety, choice, and food quality. So there may be some things that could be tried to to help increase the appeal of the food for the kids. So for example, maybe starting with a 2-week rotation as you're, first getting started with the after school meal, but then moving to a 4-week rotation to increase the, the amount of variety that kids have. Offering a, choice whenever possible. So, kids love to have choices, and, for better or worse, especially at the high school level and somewhat to a middle school level, we are really competing here with, fast food or with corner stores or, those types of snack options. And so, to the extent that we can offer choice is awesome. So, could there be a choice of 2 fruits? Could there be a choice of 2 main entrees? So for instance, a salad or a sandwich. Could there be a choice of toppings, allowing them to kind of build their own salad or build their own sandwich? A lot of success that has been seen in the lunch program around salad bars. Could that also be something similar for offering choice in the after school meal? Perhaps not all possible, but just some things to think about and consider as we try to really improve participation in this program. Next slide. Okay, and so that is all that I really wanted to say about the pilots, but what I'm really excited about is to introduce you to Betty Crocker, who is the nutrition specialist at Alvord Unified School District in California. Betty was one of our pilot partners who ran the Umbrella Model program in 2 schools in her district with varying success in those, and so I think we really learned a lot from her in terms of what works and what didn't. So we would love to have Betty tell us a little bit about her pilot, and hopefully this will help from a food service perspective, and we'd love for you to also chat in any questions for her that we'll take at the end of the presentation, so you can hear directly from someone who's done this at a school. So take it away, Betty.
Hey Jill, thank you for the gracious introduction, and greetings from California. We have about 70 degrees today, so we're just suffering over here in beautiful weather. And the weather is actually was an important element to our success with the supper program. We have unique setups where we have the supper offered, and so our California weather was incredibly helpful. And I wanted to echo a couple of things that our colleagues introduced prior, which was the key to our success, absolutely hands down, was our administrative champion, as they shared with us. In plain simple English, in my world, that meant the principals. In my school district, everything is possible because of the principals. So I had, over at my high school, it was the first time that we were launching the supper program over at the high school, and this program was largely tied to the principal sitting down at a staff meeting and having me and my colleagues come to the staff meeting and share with them what the supper program means, and also share the need. So one of the things that we've been able to do is really build a big, what I call a fan base. So at the bedrock of our fan base, our champion may be the principals, but the folks that really carry our message are the teachers in the classroom, and they make a really big difference. And teachers have a really big heart for our students, especially when they understand the need. When you show them our food insecurity and the fact that our athletes are going without food, but we're expecting them to perform. So you kind of get a lot of folks on board to wrap around that model. And so how we were able to follow up, I think, was probably the biggest key. When we began to launch the supper program, I'm sure anybody on the line that has ever launched any kind of program, you're going to have hiccups, and it's to be expected. So I just call it bumping into walls and making friends. And so literally, I camped out for the first few weeks that we were doing this supper program over at the high school, and I had the principal on text message, and it was nothing for me to text message him and say, hey, I haven't seen the football team, go get me the football team. And the son of a gun, here comes, 50 boys running up the hill to go grab breakfast. It was just a huge culture change and a new offering to all of these coaches, and it just took them, some reinforcements to ensure that they're going to be able to get supper, and they'll be able to get it in a timely fashion. And then the other champion that would probably fall right underneath the principal at the high school level is that we have an athletic director. So the athletic director was paramount to our planning. One of the things that happens in athletics, of course, is that our teams have away games, and then they also bring students to the campus as well. So being able to coordinate all of that was incredibly valuable. And without those two strong champions, which were the principal and the athletic director, we would not have experienced as much success. And then so once we started, beginning to build the trust and reshaping the culture of our growing scope of practice to serve supper, the next thing that I learned is how to communicate with the kids. So the kiddos, that may sound like something incredibly basic, and maybe it made a few of you giggle, but learning to talk to the kiddos in their language was incredibly important. So I would have the kiddos come up to me and say, hey, Betty, are you serving late lunch today? And because in California, my kiddos don't know what supper is. They're confused when they see that word supper. So I reshaped the PR program with their words, so it was kiddo-friendly language, and we called it the late lunch program. And, those were the terms that they could understand. And I happen to have a really great supper partner to provide the suppers, which is, in my case, it was 5-Star Gourmet. And they offer a pretty solid offering for the kiddos. But one of the things that I learned from our athletes, and again, it was just because we camped out so much, is that instead of offering them one entree as I was in the elementaries, we offered them two choices. So they had a choice between a, in our world we'd call it a shelf stable, in other words, a room temp product versus a cold product. One of the things that we learned is that the athletes really like that room temp product, and it would come with things like dried fruits and sunflower seeds, is that they could throw that in the pack, and they didn't have to eat the whole thing before they went to practice. It would just sustain them throughout their athletics or the drama, whatever program it is that they were coming to us from. And Jill, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Was there anything else that you wanted me to touch base with?
No, I think that's great. Thank you so much, Betty. I really appreciate that, that hearing your experience, and I'm sure that we will have questions for you. Carolyn, we're going to do those at the end, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Thank you, Betty. Carolyn, there was a couple of questions that came through in the chat that were sort of regulatory around this. Did you want to address those real quick before we move on to supper in the classroom?
No, we'll get to that at the end.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So moving on, we are going to talk briefly about our experience with our next model that we wanted to test, supper in the classroom. And I do just want to be clear, because I did see this question come through, so I'm just going to briefly mention. With umbrella model, we were focused on the middle and high school level, because we know that kids have more control over their time and their after-school hours in the middle and high school range. So that was a model that we really saw as more appropriate for that age group. whereas supper in the classroom we tested at the elementary level because this is a model that we feel lends itself better to this age group, but we'll talk about that. But I did just want to clarify the difference in ages between these two models. So, okay, so what is supper in the classroom? It's, really what it sounds like, kids eating supper together in the classroom. Very similar to a breakfast in the classroom, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. What data is going into these findings? So we had 4 direct pilot schools, so 4 schools that we were implementing and watching this whole thing unfold. We also are using the experience of 9 schools that have already been implementing this supper in the classroom model, so we were able to talk to some administrators and food service folks there and really learn from their experience as well. Some of them have been implementing this actually for over a decade because they were part of some of the test sites of CACFP, even though after-school meals has not been available for everyone for over a decade. They were in Oregon, so they were able to do that. So we really feel like we have a good body of evidence to support these findings as well. So one of the really exciting things that we found, and is probably no surprise for those who are familiar with, direct classroom models like breakfast in the classroom, but supper in the classroom can lead to more supper eaters even than lunch eaters, which is really exciting. And perhaps not all that surprising, given that, with lunch, kids can, obviously choose to bring their own lunch, even if they are, eligible for free and reduced lunch, whereas with supper, would not be as common to bring your own supper to school. But so on average over our 4 pilot schools, 80% of all of students of the whole student body were participating, and over 100% of the free and reduced price eligible students were participating in supper. So that's really, really exciting in terms of truly meeting the need at the school. And after school meal participation was 110% of lunch participation. So really exciting in terms of participation. So let's talk about what makes this a really effective program and how this works. So best practice number 1 is, we really think that the best target for schools to implement supper in the classroom are those that are either extended day schools or schools that are over their required instructional time by the state. So the interesting part about extended day schools is that by regulation they can actually offer the meal as part of the school day. So obviously that opens up a lot of flexibility, that solves a lot of the challenges that other schools might have doing this. However, we also found that schools over required instruction time are great candidates for this, because what happens is they typically move their last bell up. So let's say their bell was ringing at 2:30, now it's ringing at say 2:15, but they can keep basically all of their other schedules more or less the same. So there's no changes now to teacher contracts, there's no changes to bus schedules. In some cases they did still change bus schedules by a few minutes, but you have a little bit more leeway there and you don't have to make as big a shifts. So we found that schools made these changes by about 15 to 30 minutes. It could be as little as, say, 10 minutes, but to really give, especially the younger grades, enough time to eat, the 15 to 30 minute range is preferable. And the exciting part is that there's not really a clear number of schools that are in this situation. However, it is really worth talking to all of if you are interested in this model, talking to the schools in your district to see which would fall into this, because I think there are more than we know. And this number of schools that are over required instructional time overlaps really nicely with the population that we're really trying to reach. So there's this quote from this Learning Time in America study that's showing that nearly 70% of expanded time schools serve populations where at least 75% of the students qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So there's really a movement towards extending the learning day in schools, and that is primarily amongst schools where there is a high population of free and reduced lunch. So that is, so that's something to explore. Best practice number 2. So this is, really important, I think, in no matter what you're doing in terms of, increasing participation in the meal programs. But best practice number 2, being committed to make it work no matter what pushback you get. We had this great quote, I thought, from a food service director in Oregon who has been doing this this program in several districts for many years. But she said, no matter what they threw at us, we'd find a way to make it work. It required a lot of persistence on our end. We can do that. We can get those wipes. We can pick up the trash every day as soon as the meal is done. Every obstacle they threw out to us, we had to come up with a solution. So I think that this is just really crucial to have that level of support. Ideally, it's a support from a team of individuals, but I would say at a minimum, the food service director and then someone in administration, ideally the district superintendent support is really ideal for creating that committed team, because then they can help secure the buy-in of the school administrators as well. So if you can get superintendents on board, then you can really, I think, do a lot in terms of working with this model. So best practice number 3. And Betty really set this up nicely, and interestingly, I had not really even thought about that from the perspective of the umbrella model, but I think that this is so incredibly crucial with the supper in the classroom model, is being able to really demonstrate the need in your community to your staff, to the school staff. And we found that a really effective way of doing this is by using a combination of data and personal stories. So just to compare some of the pilots that we did, we had 2 pilots in Michigan and 2 in Ohio. In both cases, we did a post-staff survey to understand sort of the staff reactions to these pilots. In Michigan, they had a free and reduced rate of about 60 to 70% at both schools, whereas in Ohio, they were a very, very high farms rate of over 90%. However, in Michigan, when we asked them how many students they thought relied on school meals for at least some of their daily nutrition, this was really in range. So about a third of them said 80% or more, and the majority of them said 50% or more. So this is, really indicating that they understood the need in their community. However, in Ohio, when we did this same survey and we asked them, same question, how many students rely on school meals, and this is just saying for some of their daily nutrition. Actually, only a little over a third of them said 80% or more, and a third of them said either 29% or less or just 30% or more. And these are, again, schools that have a farms rate of over 90%, almost 100%. So really, really showing this mismatch between what the real need in the community is and what the staff perceptions were here. And unfortunately, or as you might expect, in Michigan, we had great success. So with this pilot, which we have the food service director here to tell us more about that, whereas in Ohio, they discontinued the program because the staff just did not see the need for this, and they just did not get the buy-in that they needed. So this ability to demonstrate need is incredibly crucial to having a successful program. Next slide. And as it relates to what we have here about using a combination of data and personal stories, so I wanted to share what we heard from one of the superintendents in Oregon, really went sort of the data route. So he said, I really think you have to have sound reasoning as to why you might offer this. It can be seen as excessive, especially when you feed them breakfast and lunch. And I think that's a really important point. Sometimes when you present this to staff, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is just one more thing that we're being asked to do. So without that really clear understanding of the need in the community, it can be seen as excessive. And so what this superintendent did was to collect some data from the kids about, hey, what is it that you're eating after school? Tell me what you're doing after school. And so he was able to really put together a picture for the staff to show, we're offering them this, meal that meets nutrition standards, that is healthy for them, that is meeting their nutritional needs, whereas compare that to the chips and soda that they're eating, you know, after school otherwise. So using that kind of data. And then, you know, we also heard from a food service director in Oregon who said, you know, for the teachers, it was, you got to be kidding me. But what convinced them was the stories, how, you know, the kids aren't getting dinner or they're nibbling on a box of cereal. And that's what won the teachers over, that these kids aren't eating when they go home. So using this combination of having some data to support your points, as well as having those more personal stories. Next slide. Okay, and so best practice number 4, I think, you know, this is very similar if you do breakfast in the classroom or familiar, you know, we hear this a lot in terms of sort of staff pushback, but one thing that can also happen with the after school meal, again, it can be seen as potentially wasteful or contributing to obesity or overeating. There's sort of a cultural thing of, well, why would you feed somebody dinner at, you know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? That's strange. Right? So what we found can be really effective is, number 1, communicating that the meal is not intended to be a replacement for dinner. Unfortunately, we know that for many families it will be, but you know, it's really intended. Kids eat all the time, right? They eat all day. They're going to eat after school anyways. They're hungry after school, and so communicating this as more of a super snack and a much more nutritious one. So compare this meal to the typical snack foods that they're eating after school. So no matter what you call it, you know, Betty, you know, helpfully talked about how they called it a late lunch, maybe call it a super snack, whatever you're calling it. It may seem weird to call it dinner, and that's certainly not how you have to communicate it, but find a way that works in your community to really help both the staff and the kids understand what this is really intended to be. And then also in terms of minimizing waste, so using offer versus serve and share tables wherever possible can be helpful as well. Next slide. Okay, and so I want to introduce June, who was our Rockstar Food Service Director in Maple Valley Schools in Michigan. So as I was saying, our Michigan pilots, you know, were a great success story. They agreed to pilot basically only for the grant money, really. June herself was super fired up and excited about this program, but the schools themselves were kind of about it. But because of her persistence and because the staff really saw the need, they also got really fired up about this program, and after the pilot period decided to restart the program and keep it going, as they are successfully doing now. So this was a really great story that we're really excited about, so I will turn it over to her to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Jill. We had a lot of resistance from the district. The superintendent was a complete team player in it. She understood the need. She saw some of the backsides of what the children were living in, and we're a very small rural district. We did the pilot program. We had a lot of resistance from the staff. Again, they were seeing it as, oh boy, one more thing we have to deal with. We were able to adjust the bell schedule, and then we put it to bed for a month. And the staff approached me and said, okay, we've seen a huge difference. Boy, that really made a huge difference. Can we bring it back? We'll work with you. And we took off flying in November, took off flying in December, and we've increased our meal count by 60%. The kids miss it. They're looking for it. They've become dependent on it. We did have to get the community a little better involved. We did have to change the name over to the super snack. We've coined that phrase. The kids love it. The parents are happy with it. We use our share tables, and we've done everything we can to take all of the stress off of the teachers. We've got workers that are cleaning up. We've got workers that are delivering. We're doing our counts. We're doing everything. We just ask them to kind of monitor their classrooms, because at the 2 elementary levels, we deliver it to the classroom. But when we started the after-school at-risk program in the spring with just the high school, we were only able to hit about 10% of our population. And now that we've been able to do the dinner at the Bell at the secondary, at the lower L buildings, we've been able to increase our meal production, meal factors with the students. We've been able to hit 60% of our population, and we've not had any complaints with it at this point.
Great. Thank you, June. So I know that we have a bunch of questions. So Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you to, oh, sorry. This is, yeah, sorry, this is me for one last thing, right? Okay, so just to give you guys an overview and a comparison really of these two models. So, you know, we'd love for you to think about which model makes the most sense for you in order to increase participation in your after-school meal program. I touched on this a little bit, but the umbrella model, you know, the primary audience here is the middle and high schools, whereas separate in the classroom, the primary audience is elementaries. You know, compare sort of what the effort level is to your expected changes in participation. You know, we would classify the umbrella model as a relatively low effort level, whereas separate in the classroom pretty high in terms of what you're going to need to do in terms of getting buy-in and potential schedule changes and things like that. However, there's obviously a huge difference too in terms of your expected participation. So in our pilots, 18% of the free and reduced students were eating under umbrella model, 14% of the student body. Again, this is typically much higher, 50% higher than what you would be seeing otherwise. But still, you know, a trade-off compared to what's up in the classroom. You're looking at, you know, well over 100% of your farm students, and then about 80% of your student body. So, you know, just a different effort is going to lead to different participation, but both are really valuable, and both can really be great ways to increase your participation above and beyond what you're doing now. Keys to success, again, administrator support is going to be valuable here in both. With umbrella model, you're going to want to concentrate on the most effective promotion methods. With separate in the classroom, you're going to want to look for those extra school minutes. You're going to need to be very persistent, which is also probably helpful with umbrella model. The strategies, you'll need strategies to convince the staff of the need, and then ways to minimize waste or overeating concerns. Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jill. And so for everyone listening to the webinar, we've got the innovation page on our website that you can go visit for more information about our innovation team and our innovation pilot. But with that, we are going to get to the Q&A. So if you have been holding your question, please write those in now in the question box in GoToWebinar. But we have several that have already come in. And so we already covered whether the pilots were in elementary, middle, or high school. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is, you mentioned direct delivery to large activities, but I thought this would not be allowable with the CACFP because kids need to sit down and eat together. So there should be eating in groups, so this shouldn't be an individual activity of eating, but it doesn't mean that every single person has to eat together in one enormous group. So I think some states are a little bit more flexible than others, but in general, I mean, this is in the USDA handbook. So if you go and look at that handbook that I talked about, it says that different groups can eat together in their separate groups. So the band can eat together, the drama club can eat together, even then the football team could eat together out on the football field, and that is totally fine as long as there are activities going on and as long as kids are eating together in some form or fashion.
And can I chime in on that for a moment?
Okay.
So I had a CACFP audit in the middle of all of this, and you are absolutely right. You know, they're just asking for it to be supervised, and every time I would run into a challenge, I found a champion over at CDE to help me answer all of these questions. I'm trying to figure out if we can somehow do, for example, a supper on the bus. Remember when I said that we have away games? I'm just looking to always offer this to our kiddos under all circumstances where regulations allow. But I think that one of the things that I have observed with CACFP and CDE is that they are also changing their mindset, and they are also learning from us by what it is that we're asking them for. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is just feed kiddos.
Great. Thank you, Betty. And just as a note for everyone, when she said CDE, she meant the California Department of Education, which is the state agency in California. And I think that is just a really great point to work with your state agency. I used to work for a state agency, actually, so I am always happy to answer those kinds of questions, since I would rather tell someone no up front than have them go down the road of thinking something is okay and then having it be a problem later. But on the flip side, if it's okay, then, you know, go right ahead and you can feel really good about that. So with a lot of these things, if you're changing your operations, it's not a bad idea to check in with your state agency to let them know they are considering a change in service model, and just to clear that with them and to let them know what to expect. And just because Betty mentioned this, and this is a question from someone else that we've already gotten, which is, do students have to eat on site, and could students grab their supper and leave for the bus? So in general, it's supposed to be congregate on-site feeding. Again, it could be in separate groups, but the intention is not for kids to take their meal and immediately leave campus to go home. Now, when Betty mentioned football teams with away games, I have heard of cases where state agencies grant field trip approvals, and away games could count as a field trip, and then it's okay, but that's more as an exception than the rule per se. Now, someone else did ask, what if kids are leaving right away to go to the bus? Would they be able to get their meal? So again, the kids can't take their meal on the bus to take it to go home generally, but they can eat their meal before leaving on the bus. And again, because under the umbrella model, as long as there are activities available and open to everyone, then you don't need to worry about those children who do leave before the activities happen. Or conversely, you could have a really quick activity that everyone can do before they leave, but you don't have to make every single child in the building do something enriching before they go. Again, that's the purpose of the umbrella and some of the flexibility USDA has given, that as long as there are activities that kids could partake in if they wanted to, that one is covered. So going back to another question, someone asked if you have to serve a vegetable with the supper meal, and if so, how much? And this is a great question because there is flexibility for schools to follow either the National School Lunch Program lunch guidelines or the Child and Adult Care Food Program guidelines. So if you are opting to follow the NSLP guidelines, then yes, you do need to serve a vegetable, and it would be in the same portion sizes for all of the different age groups that you're following for NSLP. If you choose to follow the CACFP meal patterns, at the moment, there is no requirement for a vegetable specifically, but it has to be 2 different fruits and or vegetables. So it could be 2 fruits, it could be 2 vegetables, or it could be a fruit and a vegetable. And for most school-age kids, 6 and up, it is 3/4 of a cup total between the 2 of them. So that means you could serve a 1/2 cup of one and a 1/4 cup of the other. Let's see. So I've gotten many questions about students eating on site, and yes, students need to eat on site. I had another great question about what is the advantage of using CACFP versus NSLP. And if you are just doing snacks, if that is what works best for your schools and your population, then yes, going through NSLP is your best bet because it's the same people, same application, same paperwork, and all the same systems that you're used to. However, there is no option for a meal under NSLP, and so you have to do the Child and Adult Care Food Program, at-risk after-school meals program if you want to serve a meal. And definitely the advantage of that is there is more food, more nutrition for your students, and a much, much higher reimbursement rate. So again, because everyone's getting the free meals and you're getting the free reimbursement rate, it's now up over $3 between the meal reimbursement and commodities versus 84 cents for snacks. So you can do a lot with an extra $2. And again, just really consider the students in need that might really benefit from that. And let's see, we have a question, how do you get your nutrition staff to want to work these programs? We want to expand but do not have the bodies to provide meals. And I will say we are working now on more resources for schools and looking at best practices across the country and really digging into some of these issues. So I'll only say for now that we have heard of some creative models that have to do with either doing just all cold meals that staff can kind of work on throughout the day and package up and just have ready to serve at the end, or just creatively using similar items for lunch as they use for supper in order to minimize the labor time. So if that is your barrier, you know, we understand and we are working on resources, and it is possible to do this program without having to actually add extra staff and to really limit the actual hours that they have to work.
Do you mind if I chime in on that?
Please go ahead.
So We went, just so you have an idea, we went from starting our school year with 2 supper sites to 16 supper sites, which was a tremendous growth, which, you know, anybody in the food service business is the first one to tell you that puts a lot of stress on many things, including the labor. So we have, exactly as you said, we have a cold food model so that the food handler's certificate, at least in our state, is not required for the after-school staff. So the after-school staff, we worked, our champion over there was the administrative team. So, of course, they get paid to serve that. But then we were able to also offer this as an opportunity for our CNS, our Child Nutrition Services staff, and we offered training for anybody who wanted to serve supper. And through both of those methods, we were able to 100% serve all of our services, and we have a solid program now going into the next year. But this was a tremendous year of growth for us.
Thank you, Betty. That is great. We have one more question. Someone said, I thought that during SFSP, or the Summer Food Service Program, kids could take fruits, veggies, and grains off-site at the end of the meal service. So that is fondly referred to as the traveling apple rule in SFSP, and CACFP does not have that kind of provision. And frankly, in some respects, it could go either way, where they haven't explicitly said you can never take anything off-site, but they also haven't given specific guidance to reassure you that that is, in fact, okay. So on that point, just because it's not really clear, it's not a bad idea to check with your state agency if that's something that you really want to do, and make sure you have that clearance for. Now that said, we do know that share tables are generally accepted option, that kids are served, and then if they can choose to leave something behind and not eat it, obviously you're not having to force feed kids. And for schools, you also have the option to use offer versus serve. And so that means that, again, kids don't necessarily have to take everything, period. But in terms of taking things for later as part of a reimbursable meal, that's not clear.
Do you mind if I add in on that?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So my CACFP auditor, she observed exactly what you just said, the share table, which they were fine with. And she also encouraged us, the kiddos, before they put anything on the share table, is, you know, if it can travel, to let them travel with it. So, you know, their regulations are certainly obviously very important. But one of the things that I experienced is that there's a shift underfoot, and everybody is just trying to feed these kiddos, and everybody recognizes that this is a new and emerging program. It's just been, I just got no pushback from the auditor at all.
That's great to know. And so again, just encouragement to check in with your state agency if you do have any questions or concerns with all of this. So with that, we're running a bit past 3 p.m., so we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but we welcome you to follow up with us if you do have any questions or if you wanted clarification on anything that we discussed, so that we can really get you the assistance you need to put these innovations into practice and to get more meals to the kids who need them. So again, as I said, we will be posting the slides, the recording, and all of the resources that we mentioned on our website after this webinar. And those exciting resources include a brief that describes these innovation pilots in more detail. We also have a quick one-pager with some just kind of fast facts about implementing this. And we also have some sample text that you can use for doing PA announcements, flyers, things like that. So be on the lookout for all of that afterwards. And thank you again for participating today, and we hope this was helpful for you.